Now on BBC News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
Samsung Electronics forecasts a likely 96% plunge in first quarter operating profit, hit hard by the continuing semiconductor crisis. And what's happening with employment in the US? A key report out shortly will give us an indication of the road ahead on interest rates. Hello and welcome to World Business Report. I'm Tadhg Enright. Well, we begin today with Samsung Electronics. It's forecasting a likely 96% plunge in its first quarter operating profits. In a preliminary earnings report, the world's largest memory chip and TV manufacturer estimated that its operating profit fell to $455 million for the first 3 months of the year. Samsung Electronics is going to release its full earnings later this month. Katie Silver sent this report from the BBC's Asia Business Hub in Singapore.
In its preliminary estimates, Samsung says its operating profits fell by about $450 million in the January to March period this year when compared to the same time the previous year. Now, demand for memory chips ramped up during COVID lockdowns as consumers bought new electronics to use at home. Think new phones, computers, those expensive smart washing machines. All of those use a lot of chips. But with fears of an economic recession looming, consumers are buying fewer tech devices, reducing demand for chips. And as a result, the companies that make these goods are just using the inventory they already have. So, to counter this, Samsung says it's going to cut production to keep the prices high. And this has caused the firm's share to jump more than 4%. Samsung, which also uses its own chips in its own televisions, tablets, smartphones, had resisted the move to cut memory chip production compared to what its competitors were doing. And indeed, analysts say this decision is quite rare. Just last month, for example, it had announced plans to invest $230 billion over 20 years to develop a mega semiconductor hub for making chips in South Korea. Investors are hopeful that today's decision marks the start of the end of the crazy highs and lows of the semiconductor industry, and that soon purchasing and production will all start to look a little more normal.
Katie Silver reporting from Singapore. Well, next to the jobs market in the world's biggest economy, we're going to get the latest data from the US Labour Department in just under an hour's time. It is a key moment to take stock of the ongoing impact of high interest rates. The US has been creating new jobs at a pretty brisk pace in recent months, but the question is if that is going to continue. This data will be pored over by officials at the US Federal Reserve as they contemplate whether to halt their fastest interest rate hiking cycle since the 1980s. Michelle Fleury has more now from New York.
For months now, we've been talking about the red-hot jobs market in the United States. Data released earlier this week suggests that boom is starting to show signs of age. Hiring is losing momentum, job cuts are mounting, and not just in the tech sector. Fast food giant McDonald's became the latest company to announce it's downsizing its workforce. And just how far the labour market has slowed should become clearer when the government releases its monthly jobs report for March. Economists are predicting US employers hired close to 240,000 workers last month, a sharp drop from the 311,000 jobs in February and an even bigger reduction from the more than 500,000 jobs created in January. Now, a gradual slowdown will be welcome news for America's central bank. Those inside the Federal Reserve are worried that the tight labour market and higher wages, well, that they have contributed to inflation. The Fed has raised its benchmark rate to 5% from near zero. But it may not cheer those who are worried that a recession is now on the horizon.
Michelle Fleury there in New York. Well, back here, the money situation is changing. Here in the UK, millions of new banknotes featuring the image of King Charles are currently in production, and the BBC has been given exclusive access to the printing process. Now, the portrait is the only change to the existing designs of the Bank of England's 5, 10, 20 and 50 pound notes. And there's still a year or more before they enter circulation. Here's our cost of living correspondent, Kevin Peachy.
Here's your change. A new monarch means a new portrait on new banknotes. On this day alone, 6 million tenors carrying the image of King Charles are being printed for the Bank of England in this highly secure site. They're ready to begin replacing nearly 5 billion notes out there featuring the Queen, but only as the older ones become worn or damaged. Up until now, she's been the one and only monarch shown on the bank's circulating note.
Portrait of Her Majesty the Queen.
Currency which will still be accepted in the shops. The King is already on 50p coins, but the monarch doesn't appear on banknotes issued by banks in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And these look, but aren't quite ready to go out.
You may not be lucky enough to have a wad of cash like this, that's £50,000. But even to just get one of these notes, you're going to have to wait until the middle of next year when the King Charles notes enter circulation.
The bank's chief cashier, whose signature is on these notes, says there's plenty to prepare in the next 12 months.
There's a huge amount that has to happen just to make sure that people can use their banknotes. There are thousands of machines up and down the country that take banknotes, things like self-service checkouts in supermarkets, and they all have to be updated to recognise the new designs.
But do we still use cash to pay? Where better to judge than at the King's Head, a site with its own rich history said to have once hosted James II.
But I think we noticed the biggest change during COVID, when people didn't want to be touching cash and they just started using their phones more, their watches, their credit cards.
How did you pay?
Did you use these?
This is this. It's just so much faster, it's a lot easier, a lot quicker, and you keep control. So yeah, I think, you know, as a dinosaur, we've moved on and evolved, and you go, that's the future, isn't it?
Is there anything you use cash for these days?
Parking, you know, the pound, meters, that is literally it, and car washes, that is literally it.
So cash may no longer be king, but in time and for some time to come, kings will be on our cash. Kevin Peachy, BBC News.
Let's talk about the relative value now of the pound, euro or dollar in your pocket and zone in on the rising price of food and drink. Coffee bean prices on the international markets are around 80% higher than they were before the pandemic. This according to the boss of Lavazza, one of the world's biggest coffee companies. And speaking to Aaron Heselhurst for this week's Talking Business Weekly on BBC News, Antonio Baravaller says he believes there's more inflation to come.
I think that all the industry faces very, very huge cost increase. And also remembering that a company like us is buying in dollars at the New York stock market. So the ratio between dollar and euro is so important. So we only partially passed the cost increase to consumers. So I would say that at least 50% was absorbed by the company and 50% was given back to the industry, so to the market. But again, this is up to the fact that we can do it because we are a family company.
And Antonio, you negotiate with all the big retailers around the world. I'm wondering, how difficult have those negotiations been given these surging prices?
So I would say it's a very tough discussion, but probably thanks to our past year's history and the credibility also that we got on the market, we have always been able at the end to find the right solution with them. But not an easy job.
Let's spin a year ahead. Antonio, prices higher or lower than today?
I still think that we didn't see yet a small piece of inflation, but we will see it on prices, let's say, before the summer, because all companies will raise the prices in October, November, that have to argue with the trade, to discuss. Normally, this is a 6 months time. So, I'm not going to say to the cost before COVID, but a more reasonable cost. So we are going in that direction. But I think that there will be still a 6 month where we could have some small surprise yet on inflation.
And you can see the full interview with Antonio Baravaller on this week's Talking Business with Aaron Heselhurst on BBC News. That's at 11:30 this evening if you're watching in UK, and at other times around the world in the days ahead. Well, to Pakistan now, where the food inflation situation is looking particularly ugly. Price rises of 47% year on year and deadly stampedes at distribution centres for free flour. That's the reality that is happening in Pakistan this Ramadan as the country continues to battle soaring prices and a collapsing currency. The BBC's Tadhg Asghar meets two families from different economic backgrounds to see how they're coping.
The kitchen is always busy during iftar time in Ramadan. Asma is trying to make her small budget stretch as far as possible with 3 children to feed.
We cook one time and use that food for the next 2 days. Only my husband earns in our family. Especially in Ramadan, we are unable to buy things. My children ask to eat fruit, but if we buy fruit, then we will not be able to cook dinner.
Her husband Abbas buys the food on his way home from his work at the grain mill.
So basically he's saying that his budget for one day for food is approximately 200 to 300 rupees. And that is almost $1 for food. I mean, he's going to manage his entire meals in $1.
It's a similar story for Hijab. Even though her husband is a sales manager, she asked for a discount for the fruit on sale. But at 800 rupees, nearly $3, it's too much. So she only buys vegetables.
If I recall last year's Ramzan, I used to manage 6 to 7 dishes. But in today's time, I can manage only 3 to 4 items because the prices are increased a lot. The pay is static, but the prices are increasing a lot.
Ramadan is usually a time of celebration, but this year, festivities are muted. The economic crisis is hitting most families hard, with only the very rich spared so far. Tadhg Asghar, BBC News, Lahore.
In other business today, Airbus has announced it's opening a second final assembly line in China that will double its production capacity in the country. Asia has become a key market for both Airbus and its US rival Boeing as demand for air travel climbs with an expanding middle class. And Toyota is planning to launch 10 new battery-powered cars over the next 3 years. The world's biggest car maker has been criticised for being too slow in embracing electric vehicles. It and its luxury brand Lexus have just 3 models and sold fewer than 25,000 of them in the past year. And that's it from World Business Report. We'll be back with more in a few hours' time. Until then, bye-bye.
We'll lift everything.
Behind every headline.